You're listening to the news from New York City. I'm Paul DiRienzo. In more national news, New York and New Mexico have something in common besides an adjective. They both host radioactive waste that's proving harder to get rid of than originally thought. In New York, the Indian Point nuclear power station sits closed and awaits eventual demolition, and the state of New Mexico hosts several nuclear dumps that are scheduled to receive the demolition debris of Indian Point and several other decommissioned nuclear plants. But a kink has occurred in the plan when last week Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham of New Mexico signed a bill blocking the firm Holtec International from building an underground storage site for spent nuclear fuel. It's a big deal in New Mexico, the location of the first nuclear bomb blast, named Trinity, that happened in July of 1945, and the Los Alamos National Laboratory where the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were assembled. Nuclear research and uranium mining has disproportionately hit indigenous people for decades with cancer and other diseases, and a lack of urgency by the federal government to deal with the problem. New Mexico also is the site of a government dump for military waste, and just over the border in Texas, another dump was built near Laredo. Leona Morgan of the Diné or Navajo Nation is an anti-nuclear activist and community organizer. She spoke in favor of the bill at a public session before it was passed. She tells the news the bill marks a big change in New Mexico's formerly welcoming attitude to the nuclear industry.
Last night in New Mexico, the governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, signed into law a bill that would prohibit the state of New Mexico from issuing state permits for a consolidated interim storage facility for high-level radioactive waste. We stopped a nuclear waste dump for all of the waste from all the commercial nuclear power plants in the country from coming to New Mexico. And this is a proposal by a company called Holtec, which actually owns Indian Point, and folks should know about Holtec up there.
What is Holtec?
Holtec International is this big nuclear company that does multiple levels of nuclear activities. Basically, they self-proclaim they have this vertical integration system where they will decommission power plants, build a nuclear waste dump in New Mexico where they'll bring all the waste, and then they're also talking about other things like reprocessing, small modular nuclear reactors, and just things that are not happening right now here in this country, but making plans as if New Mexico wants it. And so they're telling people, I was on one of these INDICAT meetings, the nuclear decommissioning citizen advisory panels for one of the plants over there. I don't know if it was Plymouth or Indian Point. Holtec International was saying, we're going to decommission your power plant in 8 years. We're going to clean it all up and get the surface to be reused again by the community or whatever, however they were selling it to them. But the thing they were saying that really enraged me was, the best part of it is we have a place we're going to take this stuff, and we're going to take it to New Mexico where those people want it because they want to make money from this waste. They don't look at it as waste. They look at it as opportunity because we're so downtrodden and poor and uneducated or whatever they were saying. So I got on the phone and said, hey, I'm here from New Mexico to tell you we don't want that waste, and that nuclear waste dump will never be built. Holtec does all kinds of nuclear processing, decommissioning. They want to build small modular nuclear reactors. And then, of course, this temporary dump in New Mexico, which is called Consolidated Interim Storage, or CIS. We say CIS for short. But that interim part is laughable because the idea is they're going to store all of the waste from the different reactors across the country, the nuclear commercial power plants, and bring it here to New Mexico. And for the interim, which could be over 100 years, to store it until the United States figures out what to do with it permanently.
Morgan, who has organized events with indigenous uranium miners as far afield as Congo in Africa, says New Mexico was cursed with some of the richest deposits of the radioactive element.
Uranium occurs in the world everywhere. Somehow, in New Mexico, Mount Taylor is one of our sacred mountains to many of the indigenous nations. It was mined for uranium. The Black Hills, Grand Canyon. As an indigenous woman here, knowing the story of the Trinity bomb, all of the things that have happened, the church rock spill of 1979 that was not addressed, When we compare these things to 3 Mile Island and how folks in the East Coast are treated differently and white communities are treated differently when it comes to waste and contamination and healthcare. So in New Mexico, we're a majority people of color state. A lot of our state is very culturally intact. There's more than 20 indigenous nations living pretty much in our original homelands. This is very different than any other place in the country. Out in the West, many of the indigenous peoples, we live where our ancestors lived. For us to be working on these issues, in fact, just to bring it back to Holtec, the reason I work on this issue is because colonization, it wasn't just something that happened when the United States was formed. It goes way back. Things like the railroad, all of these laws and ways that were to contain our Mother Earth and to divide up and put all these invisible lines on her.
And Morgan adds, the days of New Mexico welcoming waste from other states is coming to an end.
We are tired of being a national sacrifice zone. We've been working for years and years to address this issue, and we've been saying we don't want to be dumped on. It's not just about fighting the system. It's about educating each other about what does this mean that we have this radioactive waste here, and what happens if there was some kind of leak. What does that mean for the people of New York City? So that's, for me, not my problem over here, but I think around the world, it's everybody's problem.
Leona Morgan of the Diné or Navajo Nation is an anti-nuclear activist and community organizer.